Okay, so in part 2 of this lecture now, I want to talk about one aspect of where we get a situation where we have a non-market outcome, or in other words, what happens when we have government intervention. Now, as I said, government intervention can take many forms. In the second lecture, what I want to focus on is when the government intervenes to make the price something other than the equilibrium price. Okay, so we know that under a free market system, or a laissez-faire economy, right, that we should have our equilibrium price and our equilibrium quantity found without any government intervention necessary. Here would be our consumer surplus. Here would be our producer surplus. This would be an efficient market in that there is no deadweight loss. This entire area is maximized. Okay. Now, there are two types of price controls that we could imagine existing. One being a price floor and the other being a price ceiling. Probably one of the most confusing things that students will have, that you will have, is basically mixing up these two. So I guess the one thing that I learned back when I was an undergrad is that you can think of it this way. You can go no higher than a ceiling, and you can go no lower than a floor. Basically, a price ceiling is a law where the price is set artificially low. And it's so low that it's below the equilibrium price. So a price ceiling is a law that states the maximum price. Now, it is possible that you could have a price ceiling a price ceiling theoretically you could make a law that places it anywhere. Let's say that this is the gas market. What is gas like? What, $3.70 a gallon? I think. I don't know. Obviously I buy gas. I just don't remember what I pay for it. Right? If that's the price for gas, right, and the government wanted to intervene here, theoretically, it can make a law stating that the maximum price is that the maximum price that gasoline sellers can charge is like $50. Now, I don't want to draw that here because I really don't want to confuse you. But what I'm saying here is that, right, you could pass a law that places it way up here. But that wouldn't be very meaningful, right? Because Super America is not going to care that there's a law that the maximum price you can charge is $50. Just like, right, would we care if there was a law that said the maximum price UW Stout can charge for annual tuition is, $1 million a year? There could be a law that's the maximum price, right? So it would be a price ceiling, but it wouldn't be effective. For something to be an effective price ceiling, an effective or a meaningful price ceiling, you would want to place it below the equilibrium price. Right, so I'm going to write here effective price ceiling. I'll make a note here that sometimes on exams, one of the trickier things I would do is I would put the price ceiling above the equilibrium price. You should now know, if you're watching this video, to know that I'm trying to trick you. You could place it there, but it just would have no impact on the market. We would still be at the equilibrium price. But if the price ceiling is placed below the equilibrium price, as it would, this is really not a straight line, but imagine that this is a straight line as well, right? That's going to be meaningful, right? We're going to pass a law that says that the maximum price for gas is $2 a gallon. That would have an impact, right? And what we're going to see here is that that's going to alter now our distribution of consumer surplus and producer surplus. Let me redraw this graph just to make it a little bit bigger, a little bit less cluttered here. Okay, so in our case of the price ceiling, right, what we have here, sorry, I'm just going to really erase this here. Okay. So, very big here. Alright, here's my demand supply. Here's my original equilibrium price and quantity. And now I've passed a law that makes the maximum price right here. Okay, so now I'm going to start to split this up into some areas here. Okay. Now, let's look at a situation before there was this law and after there was this law. So before the law that made the price ceiling meaningful, the consumer surplus would have been what? Would have been areas A, B, and C, right? Because this would have been the price, right? The equilibrium price. So before the law was passed, the consumer surplus was A, B, and C. And what was the producer surplus? Well, the producer surplus would have been areas D, E, and F. Now what about afterwards? After the law was passed, this is now where the price is. Notice here, only this amount is going to be actually supplied by the gas stations. So what does that mean? That means that the consumer surplus is going to be what? Is now going to be areas A, B, and D. Because, right, the consumer surplus represents the difference between the price that was actually paid, which would be $2, and the maximum price they were willing to pay, which is represented by the demand curve. So after the price ceiling law was passed, the consumer surplus is going to be the difference between the price they actually paid, or I'm sorry, the price that they actually paid, and the maximum price they would have been willing to pay. But it only goes out to right here. And the reason why it only goes out to right there is because this is the maximum quantity that firms are now willing to sell. They're not willing to sell out to here because they're not getting that high of a price. We know that from the law of supply. So afterwards, the consumer surplus is areas A, B, and D. A, B, and D. What about the producer surplus? It's only going to be area F, right? Because it's going to represent the difference between the supply curve and the price that they actually sold it for. Look at areas C and E. That's meaningful for us because notice what happened here. Area D used to belong to the producer, correct? But it was transferred to consumers when the law was passed. Economists have no problem whatsoever with transferring a surplus between producers and consumers and vice versa. So economists have no problem with area D. What economists do have a problem with is the fact that E was lost by the producer but not transferred to the consumer. And economists also have a problem with area C, because that was lost by consumers but not captured by producers. This is known as our deadweight loss. That would be areas C and E. And we could actually calculate now areas C and E. And we can do that with some simple algebra. Right? So what I would have to give you here is the demand curve, give you the supply curve, and then you would find the equilibrium price and quantity. Then I would give you an effective price ceiling, so I would give you a price that's below the equilibrium price. And from that, you would then start to plug the numbers in and solve the missing either prices or quantities. I'll do a sample problem. I will scan it and I will post that as an email, either as an email or as a document under the Contents tab.